Hello and welcome back to the OMG MotoGP podcast ahead of the German Grand Prix from Sachsenring. Alongside myself, Renita Vermeulen, I am joined by the man who needs no introduction, Mr. Keith Huewen. Keith, how good are back-to-back Grand Prix weekends?
Yeah, brilliant, aren't they? I always look forward. Sachsenring, though, is one of those tracks that it's a dodgy track. It's a very, barriers are close. You've got, loads and loads of left-handers before you drop into turn 11, the one and only big right-hander where you can lose the front end easily, and we see it all the time. So it's a track that takes some getting used to. I suppose the big question this weekend is whether Marc Marquez can convert a GP23 into a GP24 beating Ducati. It's the track that he is the ringmaster of. We'll wait and see whether he manages to do that. I somehow doubt it. I really do. I mean, I think that he's just that little bit off the pace. The bike is just that little bit off the pace compared with everyone on the 24s at the moment. So we'll see. But if anybody can pull it out of the bag, it's Marc Marquez, of course. And what was that stat? 987 days since his last win.
Yeah.
And, of course, that links us into Acosta as well, doesn't it? Because this is the last chance for Acosta to be the youngest ever MotoGP winner, which Marc is at the moment. So there's a few things at stake this weekend from a statistical point of view, but nobody really cares. And certainly those riders probably don't care about those particular minute statistics.
That's what I was going to ask you as a rider. Is that something you think about, or do you think that those guys, they only care about winning, right? They're not there to chase stats and everything like that?
I think stats are great, and I think they're in the history book, aren't they? So, I mean, maybe they don't care about them as it is at the moment, but in 20 years' time when they're talking to their grandkids or whatever it is, and everybody's turning up all these stats and all these wonderful things that they've done in the past, I think that's probably when you think about it then. I never thought about lap records and stuff like that until decades later, and only as a comparator quite often with what's going on now. So I think that I don't think they're important to riders per se, but they certainly become more important as you get older. What's the old legend? The older I get, the faster. The older I get, the faster I get. Something along those lines.
I'm sure that's quite common among many ex-riders indeed. But talking about current riders, we've obviously had the news of Aleix Espargaro's officially signing for HRC as their test rider. And in a tweet he put out today, because obviously at Assen he didn't race with that injury, but he said he's going to try and race this weekend. So what's your thoughts on Aleix signing with HRC as a test rider?
Interesting. Interesting only from the point of view that we've not seen any action from Honda, have we, that we were expecting this year to try and move forward. Yamaha are pulling up all the routes at the moment to make their progress. Honda not so. Aleix signing, well, he's a good rider. He's a fast rider. He'll have feedback. It's the very, very start of a fight back, I think. It's a long road for Honda. Aleix is on it. Let's wait and see how that turns out for him. I mean, it's Cal Crutchlow, Yamaha, these guys are important to have very fast test riders. It's no good testing a motorbike if it's half a second off the pace. That's just a waste of time. It doesn't develop anything. Which links us to one of your own in Remy, of course, is riding in Alex Rins' place. I mean, it'd be interesting what Remy can bring to the Yamaha table, to whether he has any or much input into those motorcycles as we head forward. I'm glad to see Remy back in MotoGP, or back in the Grand Prix paddock, I should say. And it will be interesting to see whether we can come up with anything that's interesting for Yamaha. But again, I think it's positive both for him and for Yamaha. So welcome back, Remy. He won't do anything, I don't think, because the Yamaha isn't capable of it. But and it's a tough little track, the Sachsenring, as you've put me in that direction already. It's a carp track, effectively. It amazes me it's still on the calendar. It's only because of history, I suspect it is. Because it does have some very dangerous corners. Particularly, I think it's turn 4. I think it is. That's round the back of the pits. It's a split pitch. You've got half the trucks in one, because it's such a small area. Half the trucks in one paddock, the hospitality, then the other half in the main paddock, and it's uphill down dale. It's, if you want a training exercise from a physical point of view, that's the place to go to. Running up and down them hills nearly knackers you out. Julian Ryder, I remember having to give him a ride on the back of my moped to the top of the hill. But I had to take one corner almost flat out, otherwise it wouldn't make it to the top of the hill. And of course, all I remember getting was this smacking on my back from Julian, thinking I was showing off. But if I didn't make the corner fast, I wasn't going to make it to the top of the hill with him on the back.
You know what? I actually have a funny story from Sachsenring as well. When my brother was racing for Suzuki, there's, like you explaining the pits, then you actually go under the track, quite similar to Phillip Island. There's that little tunnel, and Chris had the paddock scooter, and he sometimes would let me drive it or ride it, and he'd sit on the back, right? So I'm riding it, and I've come into that tunnel really quite quickly, and Valentino Rossi was right there, and I'm on the Australian side of the road and not the European side of the road, and I nearly ran into Valentino Rossi. So that was a great day. It was a long time ago. But yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. It is a weird layout of a circuit. But going back to Remy Gardner just real quick, I was having a look all the way back to 2021 when he was in Moto2, and looking back at that race where he did win it by 6 seconds ahead of back then, or his teammate then was Raul Fernandez, who crashed out. Augusto Fernandez was there as well. There's a lot of names who are now in MotoGP he was battling with back then. So I think for him going into this weekend, it's good memories there. But like you said, it's a one-off race. He's kind of just there to fill a seat because obviously Alex Rins is out. Cal Crutchlow's still out with that injury as well. So he was the next one to get called up. But I did think that his quote that he said, "Thanks to Yamaha for trusting in me," I thought that was quite interesting with the whole KTM dynamic and how that all ended in the end. But what's your thoughts on that, Keith?
It's a big step for Remy. It's a good step, though. At the end of the day, trusting in him is important. That Yamaha you've got to keep riders on side. You've got to make them, feel that they're wanted, that they're special, and you get the best performance out of them. Remy can ride a big bike. There's no doubt about that. His dad always used to say to me back in the day that Remy on a big bike, give him a bigger bike, and he goes better on the bigger bikes than on the smaller ones back in the day. So I think it's an opportunity. But a bit of a poison chalice in as much as that the Yamaha is struggling still at the moment. But everybody knows what's relative in the paddock. If he finished last, but it was a good ride, all of the people in the paddock will know that he had a good ride. It's not like, he finished, wherever he finished. And it's, like punters across the side of the fence sometimes will blame a rider for finishing in a place that they could only finish in. It's impossible to have done better on that machinery, perhaps. Whereas people in the paddock are so in tune with everything that's going on, they understand every nuance of what's going on in the paddock and who's doing what on the racetrack. Even if the positioning doesn't seem to be that great or the time doesn't seem to be that great, it's relative to that motorcycle, that track, and that rider's performance. They know when someone's underperforming, let's put it that way, and they know when someone like Remy, for instance, will give it his all. We know one thing from Remy. He ain't going to leave anything on the table.
No, he's definitely not. Moving into this weekend is the last race before they go into the summer break, and there's still a lot of seats that are empty. Pramac going over to Yamaha just been announced. I don't know if you guys discussed this on the last pod, but what's your thoughts going there? Are we going to start to see more signatures on contracts this weekend, or do you think they're going to go into the summer break and discuss things before they come back?
It's almost become a little bit old-fashioned, isn't it, this year? I mean, in the past, we've had contracts all signed up by sort of March, April, ridiculously early. I think teams have had a bit more opportunity this year to take a longer look at what's going on in the marketplace generally. So things are a little bit slower for some of the lesser, if I can put that in inverted commas, a position, lesser team situations. Although there might be a bit of a rush at Gresini, or I don't know whether it's a rush into Gresini or a rush out of Gresini with the rumours that have been firing on at the moment with the good old Lewis Hamilton thing. I mean, I've got no idea whether it's just clickbait or what at the minute. I mean, it hasn't hit any of the major publications. Lewis Hamilton is reportedly, and that's the word, reportedly, in other words, no one's got any definites as far as this is concerned, is reportedly looking at buying Gresini. My feeling is that he's got no chance of buying Gresini. I can't imagine Nadia selling it or selling an interest in it. But the positive side to that is it's good spin. It's good spin for MotoGP to have someone like Lewis Hamilton supposedly involved or interested. We know he's a good motorbike rider. If you remember back to the Yamaha Switch thing that they did with Valentino and he swapping Formula One and MotoGP bikes, Hamilton can ride a motorbike quite well, as you might expect from somebody that's got that hand-to-eye coordination and is a bloody good racer. Whether Hamilton Enterprises are keen on a MotoGP slot, you would think, why not? If ever there was a time with Liberty buying in and Liberty looking to promote the sport in such a way. All I hope is that we don't end up dressing like him.
I mean, Fabio sometimes goes there, doesn't he, with his little frosted tips and some of his outfits, but yeah.
Honestly, I mean, they call it style, but I don't know what style. I suppose I'll get the old bloke punch in the head for making the comment, but I don't mind that. It's I just think to myself, well, I don't know quite how that fits into the demographic that we have in motorcycling at the moment, but that's the point, isn't it? It's a different marketplace, and that is the big point. Whether your stalwarts, if you like, are going to be anti-Hamilton because of that. I mean, it's quite amusing in my house. My wife is a massive Hamilton fan. I can take it or leave it, to be honest with you. I recognise his talent, obviously, as a sportsman, but his dress sense and some of the slightly virtue signalling manner just kind of gets on an old bloke's nerves. And I suspect that I represent quite a large silent-ish majority when it comes to that kind of thing. But from an overall sports point of view, it's heaven sent for Dorna. It's heaven sent for the sport in general to have a name like Lewis Hamilton involved, if he ever does get involved, if it is a serious opportunity. Somehow I doubt it. And why would you want to be involved with Gresini unless they were getting full factory? You'd want full factory if you were going to get hooked up. Maybe Gresini will have full factory if Lewis Hamilton gets involved as well. There are so many moving parts to this story at the minute. It'll be interesting to see whether it becomes fact. Right now, it's rumour, clickbait, and so on. And I have to say that Gresini, I have no idea whether this was a direct response to the clickbaity rumour that came out. When Gresini put up on their ex Twitter timeline the fact that they bought 51% of NASA, showing the space shuttle, which I thought was a fantastic response. So big ups to Gresini's PR in getting that out there. That may have been a cheeky response to it, like as in there's absolutely about as much chance as us buying into NASA or as Lewis Hamilton buying into Gresini. That's the way I took it. There may have been something else to it that I've completely missed, but amusing nonetheless. But good for the sport. It's got us to, MotoGP is being talked about in an ever increasing wider circle, and that can't be bad.
I completely agree. I think from the standpoint that I have is, I know Lewis Hamilton's part owner in an American football team. He had that Formula Extreme off-road car team. So clearly he's obviously investing in sport, right? Which is great. I think that with what Lewis brings is he brings part of that younger generation, like you're talking about, diversity. He's obviously a darker skinned driver in Formula One. He's creating or extending all these boundaries. I think just having that name involved with MotoGP is going to open up everything, because the younger generation, if they hear Lewis Hamilton's got merchandise, they're going to go buy that merchandise, right? So if stuff's starting to get linked in with Lewis Hamilton and his name, that's only going to benefit MotoGP. And like you said, with Liberty and Dorna, who knows if it is true that maybe Liberty aren't just going to do another Drive to Survive for MotoGP. Maybe they're going to go a different avenue if Lewis does become a team owner. But this is me talking complete hypothetically, going, I think this is going to be good if it's true, but we'll just have to wait and see. Who knows? Who knows when that's going to be announced? But before,
there's only one phrase I've got to go with that, Renita. Yeah? Show me the money.
I lost some of that too. Thanks.
Show me the money. Let's see his money, the colour of his money. If Hamilton wants to get involved and bring in people, then let's see the funding that goes with it.
Yeah. The reason that I think Gresini would be the team is because it doesn't have that major sponsor like all the other ones do. So I don't know if it would get rebranded to Lewis Hamilton 44, that branding, then Gresini, or Gresini Lewis Hamilton, something like that, compared to like obviously Monster Energy, Yamaha, Repsol, Honda, these ones who have these massive brands. That's the only reason why I go, maybe there's something there to this rumor, but it is still a rumor. So yes, like you said, let's wait and see the money. But Keith, we did actually have a question from one of our listeners, Gary, and I was hoping that you could answer this one for us because I know quite a lot of people are thinking similar. So Gary asks, I get that the tire pressure rule or tire pressures can be dangerous as you don't want the tire exploding, but I just don't get the safety issues with the lower limit tire pressure, other than the bike won't handle as well, but that just slows the rider down maybe. So, Keith, can you talk about the tire pressure rule and how it's come about, how it impacts the riders?
Michelin have set a lowest tyre pressure. You've got to be 50% of the race has got to be spent above the lowest limit. They've lowered the limit a little bit for this year. There's supposed to be a new tyre coming out at some stage that's going to cope with this a little bit better. The problem is Aero has put a lot more pressure on the front, has put a lot more pressure on tyres, something I don't think Michelin has yet responded properly to. They're obviously going to. The lower limit is set, and if you spend too much time below the lower limit, then basically you get penalised. It was going to be a exclusion from the results as of last year. That was the penalty. Now it's a 16 seconds penalty, which Marc Marquez for 0.01 bar for half a lap or whatever it was, because they've got telemetry, so they can tell exactly when and if and why. And he knew he was below the pressure for too long. That's why he was waving people past. That's why he was sitting in the slipstream of other riders to try and get their hot air that's coming off the bikes in front to keep his tyre above the minimum pressure that it was. The reason why riders and teams always want to run a lower pressure is because you get much more squidge. The tyre squidges and the contact patch widens out over the track. When it gets too hot, when it overheats, the tyre pressure goes up, and it's not about an explosion. What it's about is it balloons effectively, so you lose the contact patch. So then your front end just folds under and down you go. So a high tyre pressure means the shape of the tyre isn't conducive to what they need. I mean, bearing in mind they are all on the absolute raggedy edge regarding grip and tyre anyway. So tyre pressures are a major issue. So you generally start a race with a tyre pressure lower than the limit. So when it gets hot in a race, and you set those tyre pressures depending on whereabouts you're going to be within that race. If you're going to be in a pack, if you predict you're going to be in a pack, you start off with a slightly lower pressure because you know it's going to build, being in all that hot air. The amount of heat that comes off these motorbikes, it's not just about how hard you're pushing it with the aero and being squished into the deck and the sun out and the track temperature. That all combines. But it's also, if you're in a pack, it goes off the scale and the tyre loses the shape that you want. It doesn't squidge into the track when you're on the brakes, when you're cornering in. Same to an extent with the rear tyre. You see them folding up under pressure, under acceleration and the like. So it's a real fine line of getting this dead on, dead right. Michelin set the pressure because of safety. Now they know better than anybody how that tyre degrades. A really clumsy example is if you run a tyre that's gone flat on your car and you run it for a mile and a half and don't pull over, it degrades. Bits fly off of it and it becomes a mess. To a much obviously lesser degree, a similar situation can happen if a tyre doesn't have enough pressure in it. It degrades in a different way. And Michelin are avoiding that situation so that too low a tyre pressure, it can deform too much and it can pop off the rim. I mean, we had a situation I think years ago with the Pirellis in World Superbikes. I remember Jonathan Ray at Donington, particularly when that tyre came off the rim as well, down into the old hairpin, if I remember rightly. Things happen. Michelin know technically they're very astute and they're trying to avoid that safety issue. Riders always want to run it lower than what you possibly could. It's probably why Frankie Garcetti looks so bloody miserable. But the issue with his rider, Marc Marquez, was that they hadn't enough track time either. He crashed out when he shouldn't have done, didn't qualify where he should have done, and so on and so forth. So they didn't really have the data, and they were just tiny bit too low for too long. I don't know whether I've answered the question, but basically that is where we're at with tyre pressures, particularly front end.
I have a question with regards to that for myself. So with the new rule changes that are coming in, do you think that the tyre pressure issue, we're going to call it, with this happening with these 16 seconds after the race, etc., do you think this is still going to continue on with the new rules coming in 27?
We've not had that much in the way of tyre penalties this year compared with last year, when this was introduced and they worked out the unified measuring system across all of the MotoGP bikes. That was the problem. Everybody was measuring them in a different way last year. Now we've got a unified software that works across it all, so everyone knows what everyone's doing. But I don't think it's going to be a major problem. I really don't. I think they will get it sorted. And I think that with the lower, when we get to 2027 and we have the lower aeros, the amount of aero that's allowed on a motorbike and so on and so forth, these things are going to be different. I think tyre manufacturers have been caught out a fair bit by the ride height adjustments and aero that's sticking out everywhere and so on. It must be pretty tricky for a tyre manufacturer to work all those factors in. It's almost not like a motorbike anymore. It is almost like a Formula One car when it comes to aero.
Yeah, no, you can see that, right? But hopefully that answers your question, Gary. That answered my question as well. Thanks, Keith. But guys, I think that is pretty much it before the German Grand Prix. We've got a ritual here. You know what it is, Keith. You know what I'm about to ask you. Who's your pick for who's going to win the sprint and who's going to win the Grand Prix this weekend?
Oh, blimey. I mean, that is a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, Marquez is going to be in there. Am I going to go for him in the main race or in? I think Marquez can pull it off. I think the GP3, Assen was a different kettle of fish. He just didn't quite get it settled there. But I think here, having said that, I looked at the forecast as well. You could be a bit of rain overnight, so we could have a green track every time we start the day's session. So it's not going to be easy here. It's a proper go-kart track, Sachsenring. It's the shortest one on the calendar. It's got some of the most difficult corners. Tyre edge grip. You're nearly 30 seconds on the left-hand side of the tyre. You've got a massive. I mean, you come out of the Omega curve, and then you've got left before you go into one of the most scary right-handers that drops off the edge of a cliff. So it is a very difficult track to get it absolutely bang on right. Having waffled on, my brain's still ticking over as to who's going to do what this weekend. Okay, I'm going to go for Bagnaia in the big race and Marquez in the sprint.
Ooh, yeah, I can see Marquez in the sprint. I can see that. But in my big race, I'm going to go for Jorge Martin because, like you said, it's that go-kart track. I think he likes that style a little bit more, and especially after how good Pecco was last weekend, I think he's going to want to try and prove a point. But
talking about go-kart tracks, Renita, I'm at one this weekend as well. It is the Mallory Bike Bonanza in Mallory Park. And we've got the first ever American road race world champion there, Stevie Baker.
Ooh, that's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. I haven't seen Stevie Baker since I was in, I won't say in bed with him, but in a parallel bed in Sidcup Hospital after we both crashed at Brands Hatch. Independently of each other, by the way. We didn't get tangled up.
Okay.
So I've got quite a lot to look forward to this weekend, Sachsenring and the Mallory Bike Bonanza. There's a lot of sport on this weekend, so you got to take your pick.
There's a lot of sport on, and Harry's going to be covering F1, but he's actually going to be back with you guys on a Monday for our post-Grand Prix podcast. So that'll be good to have him back on. But I think that's pretty much it ahead of the German Grand Prix. Keith, thank you so much for joining me once again. Listeners, if you can't get enough of OMG MotoGP, then check out our social channels at OMG MotoGP on all of the platforms. Or if you have a question for our team, just like Gary, you can email us at omgmotogp@gmail.com. And lastly, we are on Patreon. So if you guys want more OMG, you can jump on there to help support us. But like I said, we're going to be back on Monday for our German Grand Prix review.